I would like to welcome you all very warmly um, to yet another interesting and fascinating event that has been put together by the UJ Library. They do this every week during during term time, and so we are quite getting used to being spoiled uh, by very provocative, uh, fascinating, insightful, and informative debates and discussions that we're having in this space. So it is my privilege to be here again to facilitate this particular program, um, where we, apart from welcoming new colleagues for being here and making your time to be here, I would also like to welcome um, the author of the author of the book that we are here for today. Um, this is a very powerfully titled and worded book, Why We Are Not a Nation. Uh, Christine Qunta. Christine, as I was just talking to her now, and she was saying, "Oh, your name is Nyasha. Are you from Zimbabwe?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, that's a beautiful name. I've lived in Zimbabwe for 6 years." So I'm going to begin there. She has lived in Zimbabwe for 6 years, but she's an attorney and an author. And in regard to her being an author, I think this is, I would say, or would constitute her magnum opus, because it is a book out of which a lot of thoughts, a lot of theory, a lot of thinking is going to emerge. She was an activist in the Black consciousness movement during the 1970s. And of course, the figure that we all know is associated with this particular movement in the public imaginary is none other than Stephen Bantu Biko. Christine was a part of the BCM movement during the 1970s. She spent more than a decade and a half, 17 years in exile, before she came back to South Africa in 1993. She has served on a number of public and private boards, and she has participated in several policy and legislative reforms during the first 15 years of South Africa's democracy. So that's Christine for you, ladies and gentlemen. The people who are on the panel, we have two speakers on the panel, and we have Dumisani Hlope. He's the CEO of Kunjalo, Center for Development Research, KCDR. It's a think tank. And I also give Dumi a couple of minutes to also talk about who is Dumi, what does he enjoy doing, and what is Kunjalo about. And then last but not least, my colleague here at UJ, Kumisho Mogwerane. She's a senior lecturer in the Department of History here at UJ. If she's in the mood, you can use 30 seconds to talk also about yourself. What do you enjoy doing? Who is Kumisho? I think on that note, having noted that all protocol observed, if I've let anything out, please forgive me. I'm not usually used to standing on ceremony, but we'll just cut to the chase, as it were. So we are going to start with a presentation by the author, a 15-minute presentation by Christine, and then we'll open up the panel discussion for our two panelists. And I might just chip in a couple of times as well. And then we'll open it up at 7:30 to the floor for questions and discussion. We're going to close at exactly 8 o'clock. So I'm going to be a little bit harsh on time because we have another event happening at 8 o'clock. So please, I apologize in advance if I'm going to disrupt, whether it's a question that is being too long or it's a panel point that's being made that's too long. My apologies for that. But Christine, the floor is all yours.
Yes. Sean is, oh, it's too loud. Is it not too loud? Okay. Sean is not here, he's based in Cape Town. Gerald is the distributor, and he does much more than distributing. I call him up at any time, ask him questions. Gerald, please stand up. Ask him questions. He's been in the publishing industry for 30 years. I don't want to give away your age, so we'll say 30 years, ne? And he's really been very, very helpful because, as you know, we've started Seriti Sasichaba as a Black publishing house dedicated to publishing Black writing, both fiction and non-fiction. My fellow director, Hanif Hendricks, is there. Stand up, Hanif, who has also been very helpful and made sure that everything, especially on the printing side, he's our printing guru. And then we have Ntate Peter Magubani here. I won't ask him to stand up, but he's sitting there next to David. I thank him for coming. We have, at the end of the evening, we'll announce something, but he's one of our icons. I don't have to introduce him. If there's anyone who doesn't know about him, put up your hand. But let me start with go back to my book now. I thought I'd read the beginning of the two introductory paragraphs, just by way of an introduction to what the book is about. The introductions don't count. Nyasha, do they take my time? Okay. Let me read for you, for those who haven't got the book. By the way, everyone who's here has to go and buy a book. You're not allowed to leave without buying a book. And this is the title essay, Why We're Not a Nation. Love is at the heart of all liberation struggles. Love for land, for culture, for dignity. It is a love, an unshakable conviction, so potent that it overwhelms even the most primordial and therefore the most powerful of all instincts with which humans are equipped, the instinct for self-preservation or survival. This explains why generation after generation, in spite of all the setbacks, Africans have continued fearlessly sacrificing their lives. From the first skirmish with the Dutch settlers in 1658 to the last days of resistance in the early 1990s. The settlement that ushered in democracy in 1994 is often characterized as a miracle, especially given all the alternative outcomes. Images of this miracle abound, the most vivid being that of the late former president, Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, appearing on the field at the 1995 Rugby World Cup wearing a Springbok jersey, which had until then been a symbol of apartheid. His was a potent gesture to demonstrate forgiveness in order to foster nation building. It became an enduring symbol of the democratic order, its defining elements being forgiveness and reconciliation. But the reality is very different from this carefully constructed image. South Africa is a disheveled society in which two groups of people with disparate goals share one geographical space. It is a country where forgiveness is overrated and justice is underrated. For these reasons, South Africans are perhaps as far from being a nation in 2016 as they were in 1994. The problem is that the majority group continues to live on the margins, economically, culturally, and institutionally. For the most part, this majority is defined by docility, yet this docility conceals a rage that simmers just beneath the surface. The minority group is the dominant one and exists in a state of precarious normalcy, having somehow escaped the need for introspection on how it achieved such dominance, unwilling, perhaps unable to let go of a past that rewarded it with such tremendously undeserved benefits. Its members flippantly urge the majority to move on. What they fail to realize, however, is that in seeking to hold on to the ways and the spoils of the past, that past is defended and entrenched. In essence, what I'm trying to suggest in the first essay in this book, there are 3 essays, is exactly what that introductory paragraph has said. I'm not going to go over it. I also I give examples of the markers of disparateness, the lack of loyalty by white South Africans to the country, and you see this everywhere. I used an example in the book, Zelda Legrand's outburst on Twitter. You know, Twitter has taken down so many people, or so social media as a whole, where she jokingly said that the French president should give her refuge. It's not a joke. There is an ambivalent loyalty to the country, firstly. Then secondly, we don't have a common set of values that bind us as a nation, which is what all nations have. It's the glue that holds nations together. We don't have that. We don't have the same value system. We don't share the same languages. The majority people's languages are marginalized. We don't have the same history. Our history is contested. Our heroes are different. Verwoerd, de Klerk on the one side, Van Riebeeck on the other side, Sobukwe, Mandela, King Hinsa. So there is very little. The only document, I argue, that could have provided that glue in South Africa and taught us from scratch a new set of values, which are very different from what we had before, that is the Constitution and the introduction of equality, dignity. But even that is not subscribed to by all. White people do not subscribe to the Constitution, contrary to the loud demand that the Constitution has been observed. Because if they comply just with one constitutional prerogative, equality, we would not need the Employment Equity Act, we would not need the Black Economic Empowerment Act, because they don't believe in equality. And so not even the Constitution can make us. I've argued in this essay, if we don't change these engineered inequality, and the fact that we do not share anything in this country, we are really headed for a racial war. And I think it will be unfortunate because, you know, these outbursts never produce a positive outcome. And I've argued and I've given 5 reasons in the essay how we can avert that. And one of them, which is, if those who listened to Power FM last night, I said is reparations. You cannot steal people's land and deprive them of the only thing that produces dignity and expect to just move on as if nothing has happened. And as I said in the extract that was in the Sunday Independent, it is an absurdity of post-1994 South Africa that government has to restore land. Government didn't steal the land. Why should our tax money be used to pay for land that was never stolen by us. That is the problem that we faced with in South Africa. So I've argued that the priority and the precondition for averting a racial war is to set up a reparation fund. And it's not radical. I'm not the first person. Tutu even said it. And you know, Tutu is hardly radical. So I think that my thing is that I think people, and don't just depend on the government, because the government is constrained by the 1994 and the manner in which we gained accession to power in this country. So the reparation fund for me is one of the most important ways in restoring some kind of dignity and balance, equilibrium. I think my time is up. I've got 4 minutes. Okay, can I read another piece from the book? Yeah, that's better. I want to just read the bit which I call the rage of the middle class, the African middle class. Because we talk about oppression, but we don't talk about how we respond to oppression. And the heading is the rage of the African middle class. We are a people in search of ourselves, with a fragile sense of self and seemingly unaware of our power. So we rage easily when insulted, but respond to domination mostly with passiveness. The 350-year-old physical and psychological trauma inflicted on generation after generation has left a gaping hole at the center of a nation that has had its cultural heart ripped out. An alien culture fills that void, but accession to it is not yet complete, creating an unbearable dysfunctionality. The void within individuals and in groups is replicated in institutions, and I really speak from experience. The widespread poverty in a country so well endowed with natural resources, the high levels of self-hatred, the endemic and reflexive violence, and its use as the preferred method of engagement are all expressions of this problem. We've seen in Vuyani this last week, 22 schools torched. You cannot tell me that's normal. The inability to manage conflict, not only in the streets, but also in an altered form in business and organizations, the hatred of each other, contrasted with the obsequiousness towards whites. The inability to build and sustain institutions that, bar few exceptions, is so widespread, and the inability to think strategically and long-term are all hallmarks of this communal state of distress that we as Black people are in. What we're experiencing here in South Africa is thus a type of post-traumatic stress disorder of a nation, one that cannot be treated because it has not yet been diagnosed. Thank you. Oops.
So you still had 2 minutes, but that's... Our second speaker is going to be Kumisho, and she's going to give a historian's take on the text, on Christine's Why We Are Not a Nation. Kumisho.
Thank you very much. Yasha asked me to introduce myself. My name is Kumisha Mokwerani. I am a senior, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Is it better? I'm sorry about that. My name is Kumisha Mokharani, and as Nyasha asked me to introduce myself, I'll take a few seconds to do so. He said 30 seconds. I'll try my very best. I'm a historian in the Department of History at the University of Johannesburg, and I write and research and teach on the history of the British Empire in Southern Africa. I'm interested particularly in Africans' own responses to empire, what they made of it, how their everyday lives, their conceptions of what they're doing. And basically, I guess, even in my response to Christine's book, the primary historical question I want to explore is, what is Africans' agency in the story that is being presented? I won't, because she has read probably the most critical elements of her text, I will not go over some of the arguments she made, but I'll just briefly say, just to give us sort of an outline of how the book is structured. In the first section, she presents an argument that despite every effort at reconciliation by Black South Africans, their white counterparts remain aloof. Also, she argues, and I quote, "A ritual dance of deception continues. White entitlement and Black docility laced with resentment on both sides and occasional public eruptions." In the second part of the book, I don't wish to spoil the book for the reader, Christine. In the second part of the book, she deals with politics of embodiment and the forms of disempowerment that are articulated by Black people, mostly women, in their self-presentation. She points to how the beauty industry privileges whiteness and therefore lighter skin tones as being better than darker brown skins. The politics of hair also takes center stage in the discussion. The straightening of curly hair and the wearing of wigs and weaves in the room as social pathology, akin to, but even more complex than what Frantz Fanon described as the wish to be white, a neurotic situation in a society where institutional power depends on the colonized inferiority complex. The last section of the book is more biographical, based on Qunta's struggles and accomplishments in the field of corporate law and the public fora on which she has served. I think the main argument as a reader that the book presented to me is that racism, perpetrated by whites and unchallenged by Blacks, structural and ideological, affecting the social order and personal choices, is a tragedy of our post-colonial condition. Qunta draws from different scholars, and of course, being a historian, I was keen to note that she does a wonderful job of drawing from historiography of race, colonialism, and power in Africa. I was particularly struck by the use of two historians that she uses in the first and second sections to argue the point that because well before European contact, Africans had societies, there is therefore no reason why it is European hegemony that should be the foundational hegemonic force in Africa today. So in the first part of the book, she refers to the work of Schuyler Marx in how she critiques Europeans' construction of pre-colonial Africa as an empty space. In the second part of the book, she draws on the work of Ben Makubane on how scientific racism constructed Black bodies as inferior. These are well-chosen examples because both Marx and Makubane belong to the generation of South Africanists from the 1970s that insisted that Africans have agency and that how they see themselves in their circumstances should be the starting point of any analysis. It is precisely for this reason that the stark difference between how Qunta on the one hand and historians like Marx and Makubane on the other hand conceive and represent of African agency is both striking and surprising. Whilst Qunta highlights the great achievements in Africans' pre-colonial history, her conception of Africans in a colonial and post-colonial context is as a category with almost no historical agency. This question of agency is, for me, as a historian, one key way to engage with the themes of race, power, and post-colonial conditions in Qunta's work. Let's look, for example, in section 1, the work of Schuyler Marx, whom history students in the room would know, confirms that pre-colonial Natal was not an empty space before European contact. and moreover, that African society continued to make and remake itself under colonial and later apartheid rule. Africans, in fact, could and did take advantage of those colonial dispensations to preserve and strengthen their own traditional institutions and elaborate their own nationalist agendas. In this process, what emerges are ambivalent and layered African identities that walked a tightrope between multiple forms of resistance and ambiguous politics of collaboration. My sense of the first section of the book was of Africans that are so structurally constrained, so lacking in agency, evincing such negligible changes in the historical condition and conceptions of themselves that interventions from above are required to help integrate them into the fold of nationhood. For example, the idea of reparations, of course, is not a new idea, as she says. Bishop Desmond Tutu has already suggested it. What I think is interesting is to think about where the direction of nation building should come from. Is it something that we can manipulate from above, or should we prioritize initiatives that come and stem from below? It's very appropriate, and I will be very brief, that Qunta should draw from Ben Magubane in the section of her book that handles African self-presentation and identity, because his most important and radical contribution is precisely around this question. But whilst Qunta sees Africans' adoption of white commodities in their everyday presentations, for example, the wearing of wigs and weaves by Black women, as yielding to European standards of beauty, Magubane is very critical of such conclusions. Magubane argued vociferously against those interpretations by scholars that Africans' use of European commodities and forms of presentations as acculturation or false consciousness. He considers such conclusions to be essentializing, as if there is one and only essence of what Africa or African is that can be so easily rubbed off by the sheer presence of Europeans' way of life. For Magubane, it was not Africans' choices, but rather scholars' explanations of what those choices meant that gave Europe too much power. Magubane remarks, I quote, that when Africans drink bottled water, listen to recorded music, use furniture in their houses, and wear suits, they're merely taking their place in the scheme of things as they are. They are not imitating anybody or yielding to the standards of the other, unquote. Magubane argued for more complicated and ethnographic analysis of how Africans, as highly innovative social actors, understand their engagement with the products, representations, and cultural repertoires of the European other. How many minutes? None? 2, okay, very quickly. And I guess, like many historians, my sense is nations are imagined communities. They do not and never exist anywhere in the world as a quantifiable, homogeneous entity. The birth of a nation is based on a founding mythology and a set of inventions, cultural, linguistic, and so on, to accompany claims of sovereignty and independent statehood. For instance, ours was the myth of the Rainbow Nation and a new tradition of non-racialism. The point is to explore why nationalism is such a captivating narrative and one many societies have used to make themselves at various points in time. And so the last section of Qunta's book, in fact, I think paradoxically demonstrates the successful use of the nation as a social and political practice. It is the only section of the book that demonstrates Africans' agency in a post-apartheid context. Qunta sketches very well her experiences as one of the first Black women to start a law firm specializing primarily in corporate law in Cape Town. She shows that the institutionalization of non-racialism mediated the successful consolidation of a powerful Black middle class after 1994. It allowed a segment of Black South Africans, including Qunta, to push back against white control and to make significant gains in the private and public sectors in which she was involved, in which all of us, in some senses, if we are at a higher institution of education, are participating in. The irony, therefore, is striking. Perhaps unwittingly, this section of the book shows that part of the answer to why we are not a nation was indeed not merely white entitlement, but Africans' own agency to use the narrative of nationhood to make a new class of Africans as a highly aspirant, self-conscious, and exclusive community.
Dumisani, your time.
I'm very shy, so I'm trying to compose myself. You can hear me, I suppose? Okay, so I don't have to hold the microphone into my mouth. You have to hold it. Okay. You see, when you go to a TV interview, they put it behind you. It's very funny, and it comes out this way. Okay, my name is Dumisani Hlope. I run an organization, it's a research company called the Qunta Center for Development Research. Our interest was to contribute immensely into the intellectual discourse in this country and contribute to the development and affirmation of Africans, however they define themselves. This is why for quite several times, I find myself bumping into the likes of Christine Qunta, who are equally dealing with a similar subject matter. I'm going to maybe answer this question at the end, because when Qunta told me a few months ago to a year that she was writing a book on why we are not a nation, my first question is, do we have to be a nation? Is it necessary? I'm not so sure if it's necessary for us to be a nation. But it's something, it's a difficult question. If some of you remind me later, I might answer that question. But I think what I found interesting about the book, I'm going to make at least 4 points. I think the book provides us with a rescue mission. We are at a point where, as a nation, we are so confused about several issues. One of those is racism. If someone says something nasty about Black people on Twitter, we see it as racism. In other words, we have removed the racism from the belly of the beast as a structural issue, and then we are beginning to see comments that people make on Twitter as racism. So we think that if we're saying that Judge so-and-so must be fired from her position, or sparrows must never work in this country, or Med so-and-so, must be kicked away out of this country, we think we are dealing with racism, and we're not dealing with racism. We are just dealing with people who are making racist references. What the book does, from what I say, is that it brings us back to say that, look, racism is a structural issue. It's built on knowledge issues, it's built on distribution of resources, engineered the socioeconomic descriptions and all of that. And if you really want to deal with racism, you really have to get into that bottom beast, the belly of the beast. This is why I like what you say about Black people, whether we are agents of transformation. Because at the end of the day, the question is, do we still have a leadership which is concerned about driving the de-racialization process? Do we still have a leadership that says, as Black people, as African, you need to affirm yourself? Because I think what the book does, Christine, it says to me, perhaps I don't need the reconciliation as a Black person. I need self-affirmation. And we get lost into this unnecessary ism of reconciliation and all of that. Trust me, I don't think Black people need reconciliation. You need a self-affirmation. You need a situation where before Van der Merwe spits on your face, it thinks twice before it does that. Unless you build this Black power, self-affirmation. This is why I like, amongst other parts of the book, the first part of the book, because it talks about the strength of Africans historically, as having played a significant part in civilization, in knowledge development, and all of that. But the question that we don't ask, Ms. Qunta, is what now? For me, that's a very important question. It's immaterial if Khumalo created some arithmetic formula along the Nile River. But if I can't reflect that in my professional behavior and utility as an African, it's not too good. I know that African says that God is African, it all started in, thank you very much, but what about now? Kurunziza is not in Europe, he's here in Africa. So I think for me, those are the nuances that I pick up from the book. I'm trying to stay away from quoting from the book because I want you to buy the book, because the book is very educational. It is informative, it is reflective, it actually questions you and your role in terms of the new dispensation and where this country should be going. Okay, let me contradict myself. There's a part where on page 87, right? I think you must read that part because it questions why is it that we decided to negotiate just before 94. And there were two reasons for me why we negotiated. The darkest negotiated because it was the easiest way to access power. Not necessarily power, but power positions. Okay. These are two different things. The second thing, I think why it is negotiated for self-preservation. There's a good reason why these smart white people went to Lusaka around the 80s to speak to the ANC. They realized this apartheid was not sustainable. The capitalism in South Africa will not be sustainable had apartheid continued. So what did they do? And this is where, I like white people, especially white capitalists. They see way beyond our noses. By the time that we wake up, things have changed, but they remain the same. So it was unsustainable to continue with apartheid. So what they did, they started talking to the ANC, and then during negotiation, what was the most important thing for white capital was the property clause. Even an aspect of land, suddenly there were research done and studies done to determine whether Black people wanted land. And unless we go into the beast, into the belly of the beast, to study where we are and we answer the questions, the irony is that in this book, Ms. Qunta says that we are now dealing with the question that we should have dealt with in 92, 93, 94. That's extremely correct. Some of these things that we are dealing with, some little organization, Black First, Land First, is because things did not happen at that time. But we can't reverse history. So the question that we have is, what is the role of the current leadership? Which raises the question, though, about our perception of decolonization, which is another question that comes into the book. The question of decolonization, what is our understanding of decolonization? I'm increasingly becoming uncomfortable, and that's me, with the term decolonization as a corrective measure of our historical imbalances. I don't think you can go back in history. You can understand history and why you ended where you are, But when we talk about decolonization as a sense of correcting the wrongs of history, it raises some serious fundamental questions to me. I think what we need is to understand the global capitalism and how it operates. So if you are very particular about the firing of Nene, because it disturbed the functioning of capitalism, you made it uncomfortable and uncertain. So the PIC today says we lost about 100 billion rands. It's a question, how do we move forward? Do we decolonize? How do we decolonize? Do we go back? Do we really have to go back to need to know where we're going? Okay, you're becoming uncomfortable. But these are uncomfortable questions that if you read the book and you read it thoroughly, in fact, each and one of those essays, there could be a book on their own. When I read the book on the chapter on the politics of hair, I once watched a documentary on Al Jazeera, which they were talking about how the Indian girls and the women, poor women, are being so exploited because hair, Indian hair is big business in the UK. And they had these horrible pictures. So I took two of them. Horrible pictures of a black girl, no, for Indian girl in India, being so traumatized because they had to cut that hair for commercial reasons. And I know some of you will say that, no, this is a traditional, it's a religious issue done every year. It has become too commercial and exploitative. I put it on my Twitter page. And I said, the poor child, simply because some black woman has to look good. You won't believe how much I was kicked in the teeth by women. So what did I do? I kept loading the links where these research articles are. But at the end of the day, I think as we read, for me, this book, I think we must ask ourselves whether we are genuine about change in this country. In fact, even the term transformation could be a problem. I think we need to question ourselves, do we still have leadership that advances the change in how blacks see themselves, but more importantly, how blacks position themselves to play a positive role in the growth and development of this country? I think for me, that's what the books, one of the things is asking, if you read it carefully. Now, lastly, to answer my own question, do we really have to be a nation? I'm not sure if I should answer that. I can leave it for the discussion forum, but you see, there's something that men suffer from something called male answering syndrome, the inability not to answer the question. So I'm going to answer. Part of me says we don't need to be a nation. In the immediate effect, we can be a nation when the Springbok is playing and there are about 5 blacks in there, and then we feel like, yeah, we are in it. Or Bafana plays and for a change it wins. It's okay, we can feel to be a nation. I mean, the 2010 craze, it did all of those things. It made us feel like we are a nation. But what's the point of being a nation when we are still stuck in deep seclude? What's the point of you feeling South African when you are stuck, in Langan, in the Western Cape? What was the point of you feeling like you're a citizen, a nation, you're a South African, but when you jog in Saxon Wood, you are perceived as a potential robber, you are running away? What's the point of being a nation, feeling like you are part of this nation? The strength of feeling to be a South African can only be useful to the extent that you substantively, in all respects, feel you are part of the country. in terms of the social material condition, your well-being and all of that, and that you as a citizen of this country are taken seriously by others and yourself. Otherwise, the fluidity of feeling being South African, when at every place that you go, you are a suspect, it may not be that good. So our point of departure is self-affirmation and contributing to the well-being of all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dumisani. I think the discussion is really set up to be very interesting. I have a couple of things just to say, because I've also read the book before. Sort of the three of us, sort of my three panelists start to discuss the book, and we start with Christine sort of responding to the two submissions by the two panelists. Well, if you want to, it's up to you. But I just wanted to ask, how many, or if anyone can tell us what a centimillionaire is. A centimillionaire. Anyone? Maybe with a centimillionaire. So a centimillionaire is someone who has their wealth that's worth, who has wealth that's worth $100 million, right? There are very interesting centimillionaires in South African history. So these were two guys, two brothers, the Krok brothers, K-R-O-K. Although Krok makes them seem like short for crocodile. But the Krok brothers, do you know how they became centimillionaires? Yes, he knows. Skin lightening creams. So they made a fortune from selling skin lightening creams to black girls and black mothers during apartheid. We made them rich. Interestingly, these are also the same guys who owned the apartheid museum, or stole it. Yes, says stole the patents to the, okay, but the concept, yeah. That then became Gold Reef City and so on. So you can read about the Krok brothers, but it's very interesting because Christine talks about identity and hair and skin color, and the black skin and light skin and so on in her book, trying to link all these issues, because in her view, there is a link and there are links. Then Dumi says, there's something very interesting about the foresight, particularly of white monopoly capital. So if you link these to the Krok brothers, who do not have a problem selling to black women and making money out of that, clearly you can start to see, at least in fragment form, why apartheid had to end. There was a market in Soweto. There was a market in Diepsloot. And the fact that black people were supposed to stay in the homelands, and they were foreigners in white South Africa, and they were not considered citizens, clearly there was something that capitalism didn't like in that particular aspect of apartheid. I've done research on the South African Foundation, which has today become Business Leadership South Africa. So it has morphed into a post-apartheid creature. South African Foundation was put together very secretively. Not many people know about its existence, but it was a grouping of all the powerful companies and business in South Africa, monopoly-wide capital. It was formed after Sharpeville. And their job, they did not care whether you're African or British or German or whatever it is, National Party, Progressive Party. Even after a while, they began to have black people like Maponya and so on. They were part of the South Africa Foundation. Our former vice chancellor here at Rand Africans University, that's what it was then, was part of that. They brought everyone who was influential in society to be part of South Africa Foundation. But by the 1960s, they had already seen that apartheid was going to end, and they were starting to prepare for the end of apartheid. So they were bringing in people from outside to see South Africa for itself. So on the one hand, they would defend apartheid outside South Africa in order to bring investment. On the other hand, they would go and talk to the government and say, please end petty apartheid. They would talk to Botha and Vorster and all these guys and say, look, we should bring black majority rule and so on. So it's very interesting that I think Christine is trying to connect those dots. She's trying to show that part of the reason why we are not a nation, or maybe why we do not need to be a nation, is in connecting those dots. So I don't know if my colleague sitting in front have anything else to say, or we should open up the discussion to the floor on the question of why we're not a nation. Please, if you want the whole story, because I think this is one of those books with very important warnings for people who have read James Baldwin's Fire Next Time. I think this is a book that I think is of a similar stature to the Fire Next Time, because the Fire Next Time was predicting problems in America if the race issue was not dealt with imminently. So we have some mics. I don't know how many mics we have. One. So the mics will rove around. There's another one here. So we'll take questions or comments, or both questions and comments. Just one request, please, let's keep them short and snappy so that we allow lots of people to contribute as well. So who wants to go first? So we have, so he'll go first. 1, 2, 3. We'll start with these 3. You can just start by telling us your name and affiliation, and then you go into your question or comment. A name and affiliation, yeah.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Becerra. I am a student here at Georgia, studying law second year.